Have you ever felt like the more aware you become, the harder it is to belong? That as your thoughts deepen, your circle shrinks? You're not alone. This experience has echoed through centuries, touching mystics, philosophers, scientists, and poets. Not because they're antisocial or aloof, but because they see what others ignore or refuse to see. From Diogenes, searching for an honest man in broad daylight, to Kierkegaard wrestling with God and absurdity, deep thought often invites solitude, not as punishment, but as consequence. But why does this happen? Why does depth isolate us? The answer lies in discomfort. Most people don't resist truth because it's false. They resist it because it threatens the structure of their lives. Truth is uncomfortable. It demands change. It forces confrontation with things buried deep inside. And so, those who speak from that place of depth aren't celebrated. They're often avoided, not because they are wrong, but because they are inconvenient. When a deep thinker enters the room, it's as if they bring a mirror, not to show you their face, but to reflect yours. That mirror makes people nervous. It reminds them of the books they never read, the questions they never asked, the truths they avoided. That tension, it's not just social, it's biological. The brain is wired to seek comfort, not complexity. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, when your beliefs clash with new, unsettling truths. Rather than adjust to the new truth, people double down on old narratives, because change, even when it leads to growth, feels like death to the ego. Now imagine living your life in a state of constant dissonance. That's what it's like for a deep thinker. You walk through a world where everyone else seems content with explanations that feel hollow to you, where simple answers are celebrated and complex questions are dismissed as overthinking. You watch people rush through life, consuming experiences like fast food, quick, satisfying, but ultimately empty. And you wonder, am I the only one who tastes the artificiality? Society, ever protective of its norms, does not reward those who challenge its status quo. Throughout history, intelligence and insight have been met with suspicion, even hostility. Socrates was forced to drink poison. Bruno was burned. Galileo imprisoned. Their crime? Seeing what others denied. But it wasn't just the famous ones. Every generation has had its quiet revolutionaries. The teacher who asked too many questions. The artist who painted uncomfortable truths. The neighbor who noticed patterns others refused to see. When you challenge group beliefs, you don't just present new information. You threaten the tribe's cohesion. And in evolutionary terms, the tribe always wins. Our ancestors survived not by being the smartest, but by being the most agreeable. Belonging was safety, and deviation was risk. This survival instinct still guides modern minds. When you speak with depth, you don't just express yourself, you disturb the tribe. The deeper you think, the more you realize that most of what we call normal is actually collective agreement to ignore complexity. Society functions on shared illusions, that work gives life meaning, that consumption brings happiness, that staying busy equals being productive. And when you see through these illusions, You become a threat to the system that depends on them. So what happens? You get labeled too much, too serious, too intense, too quiet, too abstract, too distant. But in reality, you're not too much. You're just tuned differently. You notice patterns in silence. You hear questions in laughter. You see emptiness in routines others find meaningful. You watch people celebrate achievements that feel hollow to you. You listen to conversations that circle around the same shallow topics. You participate in rituals that everyone agrees are important, but no one can explain why. And slowly, you begin to feel like you're living in a different world, one where depth exists, where questions matter, where silence has meaning. And so, you retreat, not because you want to be alone, but because it's exhausting to pretend. It's hard to stay engaged when conversations skim the surface and your soul is diving deep. You begin to crave solitude, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. In that silence, thoughts can breathe. That solitude becomes sanctuary. You pick up books instead of phone calls. You write instead of explain. You observe rather than engage. You learn to find company in authors who died centuries ago, who understood your struggles better than your contemporaries do. You discover that Virginia Woolf felt this isolation, that Nietzsche wrote about it, that Marcus Aurelius reflected on it in his private journals. You realize you're part of an invisible lineage, a chain of thinkers throughout history who chose depth over belonging, truth over comfort, solitude over superficiality. But with isolation comes insight. You begin to understand the world not just through facts, but through patterns, emotions, paradoxes. You realize that intelligence isn't a ladder to climb, but a lens to see. And through that lens, the world is both more painful and more beautiful. You see the tragedy in how people waste their lives on things that don't matter. But you also see the beauty in small moments of genuine connection, in art that speaks truth, in the rare person who asks real questions. You become a student of human nature in ways others never need to be. You notice how people's words contradict their actions, how their fears shape their choices, how their deepest desires remain unspoken. You start asking questions others don't think to ask. Why do we chase things that never satisfy? What is freedom when our desires are manufactured? Can love exist without ego? What does it mean to live authentically in a world built on performance? Why do we fear death more than we fear not living? How much of our personality is really ours, and how much is programming? These aren't casual questions. They shake the foundations. And when you ask them out loud, the room grows quiet. Because people don't want to hear that their jobs feel meaningless, their relationships are performative, or their joys are borrowed. It's easier to scroll than to reflect, easier to distract than to dissect. You start asking questions others don't think to ask. Why do we chase things that never satisfy? What is freedom when our desires are manufactured? Can love exist without ego? What does it mean to live authentically in a world built on performance? Why do we fear death more than we fear not living? How much of our personality is really ours, and how much is programming? These aren't casual questions. They shake the foundations, and when you ask them out loud, the room grows quiet. Because people don't want to hear that their jobs feel meaningless, their relationships are performative, or their joys are borrowed. It's easier to scroll than to reflect, easier to distract than to dissect. This is where many deep thinkers face their greatest challenge, the temptation to numb the pain of seeing. Some turn to substances, others to cynicism. Some retreat so far into solitude that they lose touch with humanity entirely. But numbness isn't the answer. Neither is cynicism, because your ability to see isn't a curse. It's a calling. Don't let that numb you. Instead, let it deepen your listening. Because somewhere in the silence between people's words, there is longing. Longing for depth, for truth, for meaning. And while most may never say it, many feel it. You see it in the way people's eyes light up when someone asks them a real question. You hear it in the relief in their voice when they can finally speak about something that matters to them. You notice it in the way people hunger for authentic connection, even as they settle for shallow interaction. Your clarity is rare, but it is needed. The world runs on surface, but it heals in depth. And those who dare to see are also those who can help others do the same. But to do that, you must learn to carry solitude like a lantern, not a burden. Use it to light the way, not just for yourself, but for the few who are ready to walk with you. This doesn't mean forcing your insights on others. It means being present with your depth, speaking your truth gently, and trusting that those who are ready to hear will find you. You learn to plant seeds instead of demanding immediate harvest. You discover that influence comes not from convincing, but from embodying what you know to be true. Because even if your path is narrow, it is sacred. Even if few understand, you must keep walking. Speak, write, reflect. Don't wait to be understood. Don't shrink to fit. You weren't meant for noise. You were meant for echoes. Echoes that reach the soul. Echoes that linger long after words fall silent. The world needs people who think deeply, who ask hard questions, who refuse to accept easy answers. Even if, especially if, it makes others uncomfortable. Your thoughts are not a luxury. They are a necessity. Your questions are not a burden. They are a gift. Your solitude is not a punishment. It is a privilege. Here's the paradox. The deeper you go, the more you realize how much you don't know. The more you understand, the more mysterious the world becomes. This isn't a failure of intelligence. It's a sign of wisdom. Shallow thinkers have answers. Deep thinkers have better questions. And in a world drowning in information but starving for wisdom, questions are more valuable than answers. You may feel alone, but you're not alone. Throughout history, in every culture, there have been those who chose depth over conformity. They may be scattered across time and space, but they form an invisible community. You belong to this community. You are part of this tradition. And while you may never meet most of your fellow travelers, you can feel their presence in the books they wrote, the art they created, the truths they spoke. You are not broken. You are awake. And in a sleeping world, that is both a burden and a gift. So walk slowly, but walk proudly. Because clarity may be lonely, but it is never empty. It carries the weight of unseen truths and leaves behind a trail of light for those still finding their way. Your depth is not a flaw to be fixed. It is a strength to be honored. Your solitude is not a problem to be solved. It is a space to be cherished. Your questions are not a burden to be silenced. They are a voice to be heard. The world may not always understand you, but it needs you. Walk on, think on, be on. The path of depth is not easy, but it is yours, and that makes it sacred.